Our first scripture lesson is from the Old Testament book of Deuteronomy, chapter 4, reading the first two verses and then verses 6 through 9. Now, Israel, hear the decrees and laws I am about to teach you. Follow them so that you may live and may go in and take possession of the land the Lord, the God of your ancestors, is giving you. Do not add to what I command you, and do not subtract from it, but keep the commands of the Lord your God that I give you. Observe them carefully, for this will show your wisdom and understanding to the nations, who will hear about all these decrees and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. What other nation is so great as to have their gods near them, the way the Lord our God is near us whenever we pray to him? And what other nation is so great as to have such righteous decrees and laws as this body of laws I am setting before you today? Only be careful and watch yourselves closely, so that you do not forget the things your eyes have seen, or let them fade from your heart as long as you live. Teach them to your children and to their children after them. That's the word of the Lord. Thank you. Our gospel lesson is from the Gospel according to Mark, chapter 7, and we'll read the first 8 verses. The Pharisees and some of the teachers of the law who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Jesus and saw some of his disciples eating food with hands that were defiled, that is, unwashed. The Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they give their hands a ceremonial washing, holding to the tradition of the elders. When they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash. And they observe many other traditions, such as the washing of cups, pitchers, and kettles. So the Pharisees and teachers of the law asked Jesus, why don't your disciples live according to the traditions of the elders, instead of eating their food with defiled hands? He replied, Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites, as it is written, the people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules. You have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to human traditions. This is the gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, it's great to be back. It's not many chairs that I can see. Lots of people, not many chairs. It's always good to come and be with you good folk. I always love to hear the enthusiastic singing, and the beautiful flowers are almost always here. Unless I come in February. Yeah, they're great. I always look at flowers as a special kind of offering that people bring to God. And certainly a lot prettier than money. But both are necessary. Well, we want to talk this morning a little bit about the Lighthouse of Gods Law. We begin with a story of Maureen, who told her young son to go to bed and be sure to say his prayers and ask God to make him a good boy. The boy's father was passing the room of his son a little while later and overheard the son praying, make me a good boy if you can. And if you can, don't worry about it because I'm having fun the way I am. And when I read that this week, I thought, that's the American way, isn't it? Even the moral law seems to have been rewritten with fun as the main object of worship. We hear the phrase often, change is the new normal. I'm sure that's not any news to you. And we see it applied to everything. And certainly it's good for the economy. A phrase like that is great. You know, you buy a 500 piece of technology, 500 bucks out the window, and 6 months later it's obsolete. So there goes another 500 bucks, right? Because change is the new normal. And try and keep up with all the dietary guidelines. What you read today will be changed tomorrow, right? It just keeps going. The world spins around so fast, we almost lose our balance. If only there were something that stayed solid. If only there were something that didn't change, something we could use as an unchanging guide in our changing world. And in fact, there is. In fact, there is. It is the law of God. On the storm-tossed sea of life, God's law is the lighthouse that never moves. Lighthouses are fascinating structures. They have a way of captivating us. Many people collect. Anybody collect lighthouses here? Yeah, a couple. I've got a sweatshirt at home with lighthouses all over from all different parts of the country. Well, lighthouses have many painting schemes, styles that we see on land, but from the sea, there's only one thing that matters, and that's the light. A few years ago, there was a song, and those who are better with music than me will remember the song better than I, as I tried to remember it this week, about a battleship sailing in a heavy fog, guided by an admiral commanding the ship. And the light was on, piercing out into the fog, and suddenly another light appeared, and they seemed to be on a collision course. So the admiral, of course, suggested strongly to the other light that it change its course because, after all, he was commanding a battleship. And the other ship decided it wasn't going to do that and to send a message back. We're not changing course. We suggest you change your course. And the admiral gave all of his credentials and reminded them about what a battleship could do and said, you better change your course. Remember this song? Yeah. And the reply came back, we suggest you change your course. This is a lighthouse. The function of the lighthouse is to warn seafarers of a dangerous shore. The warning is especially important when the sea is tossed about in a great storm or in the darkness of night. And life is like that sometimes. The sea you are on may be rough. The storms of life may have blown you off course. The darkness of night may have enveloped you. But look for the lighthouse. Depend on God's law as your guide in life's ups and downs. Speaking of this law, the first verse that I read, Deuteronomy 4:1, says this, Now Israel, hear the decrees and laws I am about to teach you. Follow them so that you may live and may go in and take possession of the land the Lord, the God of your ancestors, is giving you. And verse 6 continues, Observe them carefully, for this will show your wisdom and understanding to the nations who will hear about all these decrees and say, Surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. The Israelites faced many challenges as they prepared to enter the promised land. They have spent a generation in the wilderness, and now they're about to cross over into the land God had promised with all the unknowns that every life transition brings. So they need something solid and unchanging, a lighthouse, if you will. And God provides it in the form of his law. Verses 8 and 9 say, what other nation is so great as to have such righteous decrees and laws as this body of laws I'm setting before you today? Only be careful and watch yourselves closely so that you do not forget the things your eyes have seen or let them fade from your heart as long as you live. Teach them to your children and to their children after them. There is a religious obligation for grandparents if you didn't think there was one in the Bible. There is a thing that parents do and that grandparents do. Grandparents are to teach about God to their grandchildren. But those last two verses, verses 8 and 9, we moved from the emphasis on the lighthouse itself to a focus on the lighthouse keeper. That is the one whose job it is to maintain the lighthouse. We're talking about the one who lives in the lighthouse and keeps its light shining brightly. Psalm 15 begins, Lord, who may dwell in your sacred tent, who may live on your holy mountain, the one whose walk is blameless, who does what is righteous, who speaks the truth from your heart. That is the righteous lighthouse keeper. At first, the task fell to the Israelites, who performed it with mixed results, sometimes keeping it with near perfection, and other times almost totally neglecting it. And at those times, being no witness at all to those other nations outside the covenant of God's love. Today, the Lighthouse of God's Law still stands for God who is the same yesterday, today, and forever. In the book of James, chapter 1, verse 17, we find these words, every good and perfect gift is from above. That's the part of the verse we remember, right? Coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. The lighthouse has not moved. God's moral law has not moved from the high ground. People who live by faith, Christians, are the lighthouse keepers. Verse 25 of James 1, whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard, but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. That's the way to keep the lighthouse. The keeper lives in the lighthouse. I don't know if that's true anymore, but that's the way it used to be. That was their place to live. And lighthouse keepers live within the law of God. Our life is lived in the boundaries outlined in God's law. We live in the lighthouse. And we perform whatever maintenance is required to keep the light shining brightly. They're responsible for keeping the mirrors that reflect the light polished and spotless. You know, it's not just the light, it's the mirrors that surround the light that have to be kept polished and spotless. The keeper climbs those steps up to the light, polishes those mirrors that reflect the light out into the sea, where many are struggling against the storms of life. And he does this over and over and over again. And the text gives us some clues as to what might dirty up those mirrors. Deuteronomy 4:2. As God saying, do not add to what I command you, and do not subtract from it, but keep the commands of the Lord your God that I give you. Adding and subtracting from the law of God dirties up the mirrors of the lighthouse. Jesus warned the people of his day about the Pharisees and teachers of the law who had really dirtied up the lighthouse mirror. The Gospel of Mark, chapter 7, we read his words that Jesus said about them. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules. You have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to human traditions. And in verse 6, he says to them, Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites. As it is written, the people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. If that were true in Jesus' day, just imagine what he would say about our modern culture, where we have watered down the laws of God and added new standards that are merely morality by consensus. Right? That's kind of the way it is these days. Or as Jesus said, merely human rules. The main purpose of the lighthouse is to keep the light shining for all to see, to guide the weary pilgrim to a safe haven. And we've all sung that children's song, right? This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. That's what we're talking about. The light bears witness to the God who gives us every good and perfect gift from above. Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 6. Observe them carefully, for this will show your wisdom and understanding to the nations who will hear about all these decrees and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. Somehow we kind of strayed a little bit from that, haven't we? The keeper is not the light. Make that clear. The keeper is not the light. His usefulness comes from keeping the light shining, keeping it clean, and directed to the struggling pilgrim who has lost his way. With change as the new normal, navigating life's sea is more difficult than ever. The peaks and the swells caused by the storm cause many to lose their sense of direction and flounder in an angry sea of despair. With all of the changes in the sea all around him, many are giving up all hope. The Lighthouse of God's Law is the hope of the hopeless. It's up to the keeper to make sure that the light is shining brightly out into the stormy sea. I close with this little story. There was a certain businessman on his way to work every day. He stopped at this little shoe shine boy's place of business. Got his shoes shined every morning. And the little boy did such a great job that one day the business was asked, son, how come you are so conscientious about shining shoes? The boy felt complimented, of course. He looked at the man and he said, mister, I'm a Christian, and I try to shine every pair of shoes as if Jesus were wearing them. Well, that struck a chord with the businessman. He started to read his Bible. And before too many weeks went by, he became a Christian. There's a lighthouse. Amen.